The mysterious Shroud of Turin.
The Shroud of Turin.
The Shroud of Turin?
One of the rarest pieces of history.
Is something that has baffled scientists for years.
Because until you have science, everything's a miracle.
For centuries, a single piece of cloth has stirred both wonder and doubt in the scientific and religious worlds. A linen relic said to bear the face of a crucified man. To scientists, it was a legend. To believers, undeniable proof.
There was no portrait made of Jesus, so really the shroud still remains the best single thing that we have.
However, just recently, artificial intelligence stepped into the debate, decoding what is now the greatest discovery. What exactly did the AI reveal, and why are scientists shocked?
Is it possible that this 14-foot-long linen cloth captured the greatest paranormal event of all time?
Join us in this video as we uncover what AI just decoded in the Shroud of Turin. What AI just decoded on the Shroud of Turin that has shocked scientists. What AI uncovered in the shroud was not conjured from nothing. It was always there, embedded in the data, waiting for a system to trace its outline. Beneath the face and torso, strange ratios emerged, echoes across brow, lip, and chin, faint arcs repeating along ribs and shoulders. Even the blurred hands carried patterns that did not belong to the weave. These geometries held steady under both ultraviolet and visible light, persisting through tests designed to shatter illusions. How could symmetry hide in fabric for centuries, unseen? Skeptics warned of pareidolia, the human tendency to find faces in clouds or toast. To avoid that trap, researchers used neutral tools like principal component analysis, methods stripped of assumptions. Yet the image did not collapse into random noise. It resolved into a field where brightness rose and fell, as if ruled by law, not brushstroke. If it is a law, what kind? Can cloth behave like a recorder of forces rather than a passive canvas? Critics pointed to halos, false symmetries, and tricks born of processing. Analysts therefore went back to raw negatives, decades apart, shot with different cameras and filters. The structure held. Control linens burned, stained, or imprinted produced artifacts, but never in the same proportions. The cautious conclusion: the shroud's image is not singular, but it is unlike others. If not a camera glitch or woven mirage, then what stabilized the geometry across light bands? The blood-like stains raised new puzzles. Rather than disrupt the geometry, they ignored it. The ratios continued beneath, as if indifferent to later additions. That suggested two separate events. One etched the image, and another marked the cloth chemically. If so, the mystery doubled. Did two histories overlap in the same linen? Some whispered that if the image behaved like a field, perhaps it came from one. Models of corona discharge, ultraviolet bursts, and electrostatic events have all been tested. Yet none explain the shallow precision of the coloration, nor its uncanny encoding of distance. Researchers admit they still don't know how it works. One physicist put it bluntly, "This doesn't behave like an artifact, it behaves like a phenomenon." But what kind of phenomenon can etch order onto linen without tools? Is it chemical, physical, or something we haven't even named yet? When the first rearrangements appeared on screen, some expected only confirmation of what the eye already sees: a face, a torso, hands, stains. Instead, the analysis revealed something stranger. It showed order that didn't resemble brushstrokes, stamps, or transfers. It looked like a rule, one no one had written. Long before AI, researchers had tested a simpler question with 3D simulations. If the image formed purely by contact, what would it look like? A cloth pressed against a body would darken at points of touch and lighten where it hung away. But such a contact map creates distortions, especially along shoulders, cheeks, and fingers. Digital artists even draped virtual cloth over models, rendering theoretical impressions. The distortions didn't match the shroud's surprisingly undistorted proportions. When the cloth was imagined over a shallow relief rather than a full body, the fit improved, but it still wasn't exact. The implication wasn't that the shroud had covered a statue, but that contact alone could not explain the image. Something more like distance mapping seemed to be at play. What's next for the scientific world? What conclusions have been drawn? Keep watching to find out. Growing controversies. More shrouds exist. The shroud exists in two worlds. One is loud and public, where headlines scream miracle or hoax. The other is quiet and private, where experiments are repeated in silence and results are cautiously shared. Inside that quieter circle, AI's discoveries spread carefully. Researchers tried to break the geometry with adversarial tests, but couldn't. Others searched for similar patterns in old linens, but none held up. One Italian team called it spatial intelligence in degradation. An American team called it a decaying signal. The terms differ, yet both admit mystery, not solution. Do such metaphors guide us forward, or do they trap us in circles around the unknown? Theologians responded in predictable ways. Some claimed the pattern was a fingerprint of resurrection. Others urged caution, explaining that science can't reproduce what happened once. While faith tolerates uniqueness, science struggles with it. Still, most scientists aren't bothered by uniqueness itself. What worries them is the haste. If bold claims race ahead of data, credibility shatters. The rhythm must remain. Measure, repeat, publish, invite doubt. But can that rhythm survive in a world addicted to instant headlines? The Vatican stayed silent, perhaps wisely. After centuries of controversy, they know any word will be twisted as a weapon. So, they'd better let the data speak. Meanwhile, AI gained an odd respect. It didn't bless or mock. It simply counted, mapped, and asked for more counting. In its indifference, AI may be the fairest judge the shroud has ever had. And yet, new questions keep multiplying. Does the pattern appear only in the face and chest? Does it fade near the limbs? Does the image follow the weave of the threads, or does it ignore them completely? Could high-resolution microscopy prove whether the crowns of fibrils are stained the same way everywhere? And what about dating? Could a fresh radiocarbon study, blind tested and taken from multiple regions, finally settle the argument once and for all? Or will access to the cloth always remain too restricted? Each new question seems to promise years of work. Which path will researchers choose first? And then comes the larger question: is the shroud truly alone? Could there be cousins hidden in museums or private collections, fabrics with similar faint images, strange geometries, or distance-based mapping effects? If even one cousin appears, the mystery could shift into the realm of the natural. But if none are ever found, then the shroud stands alone, and the stakes grow higher. Which is more unsettling, finding kinship or proving uniqueness? And if uniqueness holds, what does that mean? A gift, a deception, or a riddle we may never solve? Let's dig deeper. The shroud might be dangerous. Speculation often begins with chemistry, and the chemistry of the shroud remains a mystery. We know that linen is made of cellulose, and the shroud is made of linen. However, the shroud's surface carries oils, impurities, and perhaps even traces of burial spices. Some suggest a thin carbohydrate film on the fibers, delicate enough to oxidize under the right conditions. Maybe a sudden burst of energy altered only that surface layer, leaving behind microns of yellowing. If the energy varied with distance, it could create the mapped image across the cloth. But known sources struggle. Ultraviolet light penetrates too deeply. Heat spreads too slowly. Corona discharges act superficially, but smear the details. So the question remains, can any mechanism check all the boxes: superficiality, soft outlines, distance gradients, and durability over centuries? Physics offers other paths. Could electrostatic fields have altered only the crowns of the fibers, leaving the cores intact? Might a brief plasma event have etched the surface more gently than heat? Laboratory tests hint at possibilities, but never the full picture. Each approach solves part of the puzzle while breaking another. So we circle back to the central riddle. What kind of force can act so shallowly, so precisely, and yet so enduringly, without destroying the fabric beneath? Some researchers look backward instead of forward. Could medieval artisans have stumbled onto a lost proto-photographic technique? What kind of order ignores stains that came by a different path? Some people will demand closure. They'll want to know if this proves divinity or forgery. The careful answer is neither. What it does prove is that the image's formation is more rule-bound than we imagined, and that realization itself is a gift. It shifts the shroud from spectacle to experiment. But another question lingers: humility. What if we can't reproduce the image anytime soon? Do we move on, or accept that some mysteries demand decades of patience? The shroud won't crumble while we wait. It has already survived fire, flood, and centuries of doubt. It can survive a careful program of measurement. The danger is this: the closer we look, the more the cloth resists every category we trust. If the image has a cause, then patients' minds will one day find it. But if it does not, a possibility without precedent in the natural world, then it will remain a mirror. Believers will see a sign. Skeptics will see a lesson in gullibility. Either way, the work of studying it remains worthwhile. The real fear isn't that the shroud proves too much. It's that it proves nothing, while still refusing to be ordinary. Should the world be scared of the mysteries yet to be discovered within the shroud? What truly lies within the fabrics of the shroud? Keep watching to find out. The Shroud of Turin, the cloth that defied time. The shroud is more than a relic. It's a story that refuses to end. 14 feet long, a little over 3 feet wide, woven in a herringbone twill that shimmers like ripples on water. Across its surface lies a faint figure, front and back, stretched from head to heel, as if a body once lay there and vanished, leaving behind only a shadow. Every mark tells a story. Wrist wounds where nails could have pierced, a blood-like stain near the feet, an oval at the side, hinting at a spear thrust, circular imprints like thorns pressed into flesh, and the face, quiet, not commanding, eyes closed, beard divided, hair drifting across the weave as though the image hovered slightly above the cloth itself. The first record of its appearance comes from 13th century France, where a small town suddenly became a pilgrimage site and a lightning rod for skepticism. Crowds gathered in awe. Priests carried it in solemn processions. Skeptics accused the church of staging a spectacle. Over the centuries, the shroud passed from hand to hand until the House of Savoy brought it to Turin. In 1578, it began its long vigil there, enduring fire, smoke, and daring rescues, yet always surviving. Today, the shroud rests in a climate-controlled case inside the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, steel and glass guarding it from time. while time itself keeps it from certainty. No single moment shaped its legend more than a photograph taken in 1898. An Italian lawyer, Secondo Pia, set up his lamps and plates in a makeshift dark room. He expected nothing more than a blur of light and shadow. But when he developed the negative, a face looked back at him, startlingly clear. What appeared faint and ghost-like on the linen became sharp in reverse. Cheekbones stood out, lips formed, strands of hair separated. Even the folded hands gained shape and proportion. It wasn't proof of anything, except that the image interacted with light in a way no ordinary paint ever could. Still, that photograph changed everything. The shroud no longer belonged only to faith. It became a problem for science. Through the 20th century, researchers pressed forward with equal measures of patience and intrusion. Chemists tested fibers with reagents. Microscopes traced every contour. Forensic experts noted that the blood-like stains marked the threads themselves, not the image on top of them. Textile scholars measured the weave, comparing it to looms once used in the Levant. Pollen experts found grains that seemed to match the flora of the Eastern Mediterranean. Does this shroud seem like a material from this realm? Could it be an extra celestial material? Keep watching to find out. The mystery of the shroud. The shroud remains a mysterious piece of clothing, with every new finding twisting the existing debate without ever ending it. Nothing conclusive enough to silence the skeptics. Nothing is trivial enough to dismiss the faithful, always offering just enough evidence to demand another test. And the image itself? It refused to act like paint. No brush strokes, no binding medium, no bleeding deep into the fibers. Only a presence, light, fragile, and impossible to pin down. The discoloration on the shroud doesn't sink deep into the fibers. Instead, it clings to the outermost strands, as if brushed lightly by a kiss of light, and then left untouched. When scientists built depth maps from the image's intensity, they found something remarkable. The darker areas seemed to correlate with the theoretical distance between cloth and body. In simple terms, if the linen rested closer to the nose and forehead and farther from the cheeks, the shading was adjusted with the separation. It was a claim both extraordinary and measurable. Many tried to replicate the effect, using heat, vapors, and even chemical reactions. Each experiment came close, but never exact. The shroud remained one of a kind, which is a polite way of saying it endured while theories fell away. Then came the question of age. In 1988, 3 laboratories tested threads taken from one corner of the cloth. Radiocarbon dating placed it between the 13th and 14th centuries. For many, that ended the debate. A medieval date wrapped the enigma in a single simple sentence. But even a clean sentence can hide a clause. The sample came from a well-handled edge, a corner exposed to repairs and centuries of smoke. Textile experts argued that the piece might have contained newer threads from a medieval reweave. Others questioned how the samples were cleaned, and some reminded the world that one corner cannot speak for a whole cloth that has endured fire, water, and human hands across ages. The debate did not end. It evolved. If the carbon date is right, then the shroud is one of the most astonishing works of medieval art ever created. If the date is wrong, the mystery deepens and the age remains unknown. And so the paradox lives on. A cloth that acts like a photographic negative centuries before photography. An image without paint. A surface effect that somehow carries depth. An artifact that resists every attempt at reduction, guarding its secrets as it crosses into our century. The shroud sits in a case that demands both reverence and scrutiny. Inside that tension, a new voice entered the debate. Not faith, not doubt, but computation. Not offended by questions, the introduction of artificial intelligence led to the rise of sharper questions, a quest to search for patterns too faint for the eye and too vast for the mind. If photography unveils the face and chemistry traces the fibers, then what happens when a system designed to find order in chaos listens to linen? So how old is the Shroud? Let's find out. Scientists discover the true age of the Shroud of Turin. The radiocarbon tests of 1988 marked a turning point in the modern story of the Shroud because they promised closure. Oxford, Zurich, Arizona. 3 laboratories, 1 shared protocol. A small strip of cloth, clipped from a corner, was cleaned, burned, transformed into graphite, and measured in accelerators that turned isotopes into years. The result? A date range between 1260 and 1390. Newspapers printed it in bold headlines. Museums exhaled in relief. The mystery, it seemed, was over. But that very corner became the most contested patch of fabric in archaeology. The lower left edge, handled by countless hands, patched after a 16th century fire, may not tell the whole story. Textile chemist Raymond Rogers pointed out that its fibers differed chemically from the rest of the shroud. Cotton mixed with linen, traces of dye, and signs of mending. If true, the corner may have carried newer material, skewing the results. Defenders of the tests countered that the labs validated their cleaning process and confirmed consistency across their samples. Critics replied that a patch doesn't need to cover the whole cloth to distort the data, just enough to tip the scales. The debate survives in that narrow space between confidence and caveat. New methods have joined the conversation, not to overthrow radiocarbon dating, but to widen the frame. Wide-angle X-ray scattering, which measures the structure of cellulose in ancient fabrics, has, in some cases, suggested ages earlier than the medieval window. Critics warn, however, that heat, humidity, and centuries of storage can distort the signal, making calibration tricky and margins of error wide. Supporters counter that every method has its sensitivities, and that real progress comes when independent techniques begin to converge. Even pollen research enters the fray. Grains from plants native to the Levant don't prove origin, but they do suggest exposure or travel through those regions. Combined with weave studies and traces of herbs reported by some investigators, they sketch an incomplete but suggestive portrait, one that leans toward antiquity without locking it in as fact. Perhaps the most striking feature of the controversy is this: access. The shroud is not just an artifact, it is a guarded relic. Sampling is sparse, limited, and always conservative, as preservation demands. That scarcity gives extraordinary weight to each test. A few threads can become a thesis. A single seam can anchor a century. Science would prefer a grid of samples across the cloth. Custodians insist on protection. Between those instincts, the tension only grows sharper. If the 1988 date is exactly correct, then the shroud is a medieval masterpiece, astonishing in craft, but still unexplained in its image formation. For no known medieval technique can reproduce the shroud's superficial markings or its strange spatial mapping. But if the date is flawed, the window reopens, not to certainty, but to a range wide enough to include the earliest centuries of the Common Era. That is not proof that the cloth ever wrapped Jesus. It only reopens the question, one that faith poses and science tests. What do you think about this discovery? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.